Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance watching the stars streak past as his ship moved through hyperspace toward Kepler Station. The past 5 years had been good for humanity since they joined the Galactic Confederation. Trade was flowing between human colonies and alien worlds. Technology was advancing faster than ever before, and peace seemed to reign across the galaxy. Jake had commanded the Defiance through dozens of diplomatic missions and exploration runs, always proud to represent Earth among the stars. The communications officer turned toward him with a worried expression. Lieutenant Bobby Chen looked up from his console and said the words that would change everything. Admiral Susan Clark was calling from Earth on an emergency channel. Jake had never seen Admiral Clark look so serious as her face appeared on the main screen. Her usual calm demeanor was replaced by something Jake had never seen before in his commanding officer: fear. The Admiral wasted no time with pleasantries. The Zephyrian Empire had sent an ultimatum to the Galactic Confederation. Council just hours ago. Every human colony, every human ship, every human presence in space was to be surrendered to the Empire within 72 hours. If humanity refused, the Empire would destroy every human world and kill every human in the galaxy. The message had been delivered by War Commander Kithra herself, broadcast simultaneously to every member species of the Confederation. Jake felt his blood turn cold as Admiral Clark continued. The Empire claimed that humanity was advancing too quickly through the galactic community. Human technology was developing at rates that made other species nervous. Human exploration ships were pushing into regions of space that had remained unexplored for centuries. Human diplomats were forming alliances and trade agreements that shifted the balance of power in ways the Empire found unacceptable. Most shocking of all was what came next. The Galactic Confederation Council had met in emergency session for less than 3 hours before reaching their decision. Every member species had voted. The result was unanimous. Humanity would be abandoned to face the Empire alone. The Council's official statement was brief and cold. They could not risk the safety of trillions of beings across thousands of worlds for the sake of one species that had existed in space for barely 5 years. The Admiral's face grew even more grim as she shared the details of the betrayal. Species that humans had saved from natural disasters now voted against them. Alien civilizations that had benefited enormously from human technology and innovation turned their backs without hesitation. The Rigelians, who had been humanity's first alien friends and closest trading partners, had delivered the final vote that sealed humanity's fate. Commander Lisa Brooks, humanity's chief diplomatic representative, had pleaded with the Council for hours. She had reminded them of every favor humanity had done, every crisis where human ships had arrived first to help, every technological breakthrough that had been shared freely with all Confederation members. None of it mattered. The Council's decision was final and immediate. All human diplomatic missions were canceled. All human ships were ordered to leave Confederation space immediately. All trade agreements were terminated. Jake watched his crew absorb this news with growing anger and disbelief. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Paul Martinez, slammed his fist on his console and cursed under his breath. The navigation officer, Ensign Mary Johnson, wiped tears from her eyes as she thought about her family on the colony world of New Haven. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez emerged from the engine room after hearing the announcement, his face dark with rage. Admiral Clark explained that humanity had perhaps 48 hours before the Empire's fleet would begin moving toward human space. Intelligence reports suggested the Empire commanded thousands of ships, including massive dreadnoughts capable of destroying entire planets. Their energy weapons were far beyond anything humanity possessed, and their defensive shields had never been penetrated by any known weapon. Every species that had ever fought the Zephyrian Empire had either surrendered immediately or been completely destroyed. The Admiral gave Jake new orders. He was to gather every human ship in the sector and return to Earth immediately. President, Robert Hayes was coordinating the defense of humanity's home world, but they needed every vessel they could find. The human fleet numbered fewer than 200 ships of all types, from massive carriers to small exploration vessels like the Defiance. Against the Empire's thousands of warships, they stood almost no chance. As the transmission ended, Jake turned to address his crew. These men and women had followed him across the galaxy, trusting him to bring them home safely from every mission. Now he had to ask them to fly into a battle they could not win against an enemy that had never been defeated. He looked at each face on his bridge and saw the same determination that had driven humanity to reach for the stars in the first place. Jake gave the order to change course for Earth. The Defiance turned away from Kepler Station and toward humanity's homeworld, where the last free humans in the galaxy would make their stand against impossible odds. Behind them, the lights of Confederation space grew dim and distant. Ahead lay Earth, alone and defiant against an empire that ruled the galaxy through fear and overwhelming force. The countdown had begun. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone had imagined. As the hours passed and more intelligence reports reached Earth, the true scope of what the Confederation had done became clear. They had not simply abandoned humanity to face the Empire alone. They had actively helped seal humanity's fate by providing the Empire with detailed information about every human military installation, every defensive position, every ship in the human fleet. Admiral Danny Rodriguez stood in the war room beneath the Pentagon, staring at tactical displays that showed the Empire's massive fleet moving toward human space. The enemy force was even larger than initial reports had suggested. Over 3,000 ships of various classes were advancing in perfect formation, led by the dreaded flagship Dominion under the personal command of War Commander Kithara. Intelligence indicated that this single ship was larger than Earth's entire defensive fleet combined. The data the Confederation had provided to the Empire was comprehensive and recent. Fleet positions, defensive capabilities, shield frequencies, weapon specifications, even the names and psychological profiles of human commanders. The Empire knew exactly where to strike and how to counter every defensive strategy humanity might employ. What should have been a challenging military campaign for the Empire would now be little more than a systematic extermination. President Robert Hayes addressed the planet from the Oval Office as evacuation ships lifted off from every major city. His words were broadcast to every human colony throughout the galaxy, reaching families who were preparing to flee deeper into unexplored space or make desperate last stands on worlds they had built with their own hands. The president's message was simple and direct. Humanity would not surrender, would not bow down, and would not go quietly into extinction. On the frontier colony of New Texas, Governor Billy Carter received the evacuation order and promptly threw it in the trash. He called together every able-bodied colonist and announced that they would fight. The colony had fewer than 50,000 people and perhaps a dozen small defensive ships, but they would make the Empire pay for every meter of ground. Similar scenes played out across human space as colonists, miners, traders, and settlers prepared to defend homes they had carved out of hostile worlds through years of backbreaking work. Dr. Amy Johnson worked frantically in her laboratory on Haven Colony, racing against time to complete her experimental quantum disruptor project. For months, she had been developing a weapon that might be able to penetrate the Empire's supposedly impenetrable energy shields. The theory was sound, but she had never been able to test it against actual Empire technology. Now she would have. At most 36 hours to build working prototypes and get them installed on human ships. The first Empire scout vessels appeared at the edge of human space 18 hours ahead of schedule. They broadcast surrender demands on all frequencies, giving human colonies exactly 1 hour to lower their defenses and prepare for occupation. When no colony responded, the scouts selected their first target, Asteroid Mining Station 7, home. To 50,000 miners and their families, was chosen to demonstrate the Empire's power and resolve. The destruction was swift and absolute. Empire energy weapons reduced the entire mining complex to glowing vapor in less than 30 seconds. 50,000 human lives ended in an instant, their only crime being born into a species the Empire found inconvenient. The message was clear: surrender immediately, or watch every human settlement suffer the same fate. Jake Morrison's ship reached Earth just in time to join the growing fleet of human vessels gathering near Luna. Captain Steve Parker of the UES Liberty pulled his ship, alongside the Defiance, followed by Commander Kelly Wright commanding the fast attack ship Ranger. These three captains had worked together many times during the peaceful years of exploration and diplomacy. Now they found themselves planning humanity's final battle against impossible odds. The mood among the human crews was grim but determined. Everyone understood the situation. The Empire had never been defeated in battle, never even been seriously challenged. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. Their fleet outnumbered humanity's ships 15-1, and those numbers included massive dreadnoughts and planet-killer weapons that no human had ever seen outside of intelligence reports. Admiral Clark called a meeting of all ship commanders on the flagship Constitution. The plan was necessarily simple because they had so few options. The human fleet would deploy in defensive positions around Earth and the Luna colonies. They would fight as long as possible, trying to inflict maximum casualties on the Empire forces before being overwhelmed. Every ship was equipped with nuclear self-destruct charges to prevent capture and ensure that human technology did not fall into Empire hands. Dr. Johnson transmitted her quantum disruptor specifications to every human ship with the engineering capability to build the weapons. The disruptors were untested and potentially unstable, but they represented humanity's only hope of actually damaging Empire vessels. Captain Wright volunteered her ship as the first to carry the experimental weapons into battle, knowing that the prototype systems might destroy her vessel as easily as they might harm the enemy. The Empire's main fleet reached the outer boundary of the Sol system with 24 hours remaining in their ultimatum. War Commander Cathara transmitted one final surrender demand directly to President Hayes. The terms were unchanged: immediate and unconditional surrender, followed by the relocation of all surviving humans to designated reservation worlds under Empire control. Human technology, ships, and weapons would be confiscated. Human culture and history would be preserved only as curiosities in Empire museums. President Hayes responded with a single-word broadcast across all frequencies. No. The transmission was picked up by every ship in both fleets, every colony in human space, and monitoring stations throughout Confederation territory. That simple word carried the weight of humanity's refusal to accept slavery or extinction. They would fight with everything they had, knowing they would probably lose, but determined to make the Empire remember the price of their victory. The Empire fleet began its final approach toward Earth. Their formation was perfect, their movement coordinated, their confidence absolute. They had crushed dozens of species over the centuries, and they expected humanity to follow the same pattern. Resistance would be brief and futile, followed by surrender and subjugation. War Commander Cathara prepared to add another easy victory to the Empire's long history of conquest. She had no way of knowing that humanity had different plans. The Empire's attack began at dawn Earth time with surgical strikes on humanity's largest military installations. Their energy weapons carved through defensive shields like they were made of paper, reducing massive space stations to debris in seconds. The human crews manning these installations died at their posts, still firing their weapons even as their stations disintegrated around them. Admiral Tony Mills watched from his command ship as Proxima Base, humanity's largest military complex, vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. Jake Morrison led his squadron of fighters in the first desperate counterattack against the Empire's advance guard. 12 human ships charged directly at a formation of Empire battlecruisers, their newly installed quantum disruptors glowing with unstable energy. The Empire commanders watched this suicidal charge with the same bored confidence they had shown when destroying countless other species. They expected the human ships to be vaporized before they could fire a single shot. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The quantum disruptors punched through the Empire's energy shields like they were not even there. Jake's torpedo struck the lead battlecruiser directly in its main reactor, and the explosion lit up space for millions of kilometers. 2 more Empire ships died in the first 30 seconds of combat as human weapons found their targets. For the first time in decades, Empire ships were burning in space. The shock of taking casualties stunned the Empire fleet into temporary confusion. War Commander Cathara had never seen an Empire ship destroyed in battle. No enemy weapon had ever penetrated their defensive shields. The impossible was happening before her eyes as human fighters swarmed around her cruisers like angry wasps, their small ships too fast and agile for the Empire's massive weapons to track effectively. Captain Steve Parker brought his ship Liberty into close-range combat with an Empire destroyer, trading shots at point-blank range. The Empire ship's superior armor and shields absorbed tremendous punishment, but Parker's crew fought with the desperation of the doomed. They knew they were going to die, but they were determined to take their enemies with them. When Liberty's reactor finally breached, the explosion took the Empire destroyer with it. Dr. Amy Johnson monitored the battle from her laboratory on Haven Colony, watching her quantum disruptors perform beyond her wildest expectations. The unstable weapons were holding together under combat conditions and consistently penetrating Empire defenses. She immediately began work on a more powerful version, knowing that the Empire would adapt their shields to counter her weapons within hours. The Empire responded to their unexpected losses with overwhelming force. War Commander Cathara personally led the assault on New California, a heavily populated colony world with over 2 million human civilians. She intended to make an example that would break human resistance once and for all. The colony would be destroyed slowly and publicly, demonstrating the price of defying the Empire. Governor Linda Adams coordinated the planetary defense as Empire ships descended toward New California's atmosphere. She had 36 defensive platforms and perhaps 50 small patrol ships against a fleet of 200 Empire vessels. The odds were hopeless, but the colonists fought anyway. Children and elderly civilians crowded into evacuation ships while soldiers and volunteers manned weapons that could barely scratch Empire armor. Commander Kelly Wright arrived with her squadron just as the Empire bombardment began. Her ships carried the new quantum disruptors and enough firepower to actually threaten the Empire fleet. She led her fighters in a desperate attack on the Empire's main assault ships, trying to buy time for the civilian evacuation. Her ship Ranger danced between enemy fire, launching torpedo after torpedo at targets that seemed impossibly large and heavily armed. The battle for New California became a nightmare of desperate courage and impossible odds. Human ships threw themselves at Empire cruisers in suicide runs, ramming attacks, and point-blank gun battles. The colony's main city was reduced to rubble, but the evacuation ships escaped with most of the population. Wright's squadron destroyed 6 Empire ships before being overwhelmed, but she managed to escape with half her fighters intact. Admiral Rodriguez coordinated the overall human defense from his mobile command center, constantly moving to avoid Empire hunter-killer squadrons. He watched the tactical displays with growing amazement as human forces continued to inflict casualties on an enemy that was supposed to be invincible. The quantum disruptors were working better than anyone had dared hope, and human tactics were proving effective against Empire doctrine. The Empire had expected an easy victory lasting perhaps a few hours. Instead, the campaign stretched into its second day with Empire losses mounting. War Commander Cathara found herself facing something she had never encountered before, an enemy that refused to break under pressure. Every human colony that fell cost her ships and crew. Every human ship that died took Empire vessels with it. On Earth, President Hayes watched reports from the front lines with growing hope. Humanity was losing the war, but they were making the Empire pay a price no one had thought possible. Human courage and determination were proving to be weapons as effective as any quantum disruptor. The galaxy's most powerful military force was being challenged by a species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. News of the Empire's losses began spreading throughout Confederation space, despite official attempts to suppress the information. For generations, every species had lived in terror of the Empire's might. Now they learned that the supposedly invincible Empire fleet was being bloodied by humanity's desperate resistance. Some aliens began to whisper about the possibility that the Empire could actually be defeated. Jake Morrison regrouped his surviving fighters for another attack on the Empire's supply lines. His squadron was down to 8 ships from the original 24, but morale remained high. They had proven that Empire ships could be destroyed and Empire crews could be killed. The enemy was not an unstoppable force of nature. They were just another military force that could be beaten by superior tactics and unbreakable determination. The quantum disruptors were being mass-produced in hidden facilities throughout human space. Dr. Johnson's breakthrough had given humanity a weapon that could actually threaten Empire forces. More importantly, it had given them hope. The war was far from over, but humanity had drawn first blood against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. The Empire's easy conquest had become a costly campaign with no end in sight. Word of humanity's fierce resistance spread across the galaxy like wildfire despite the Confederation's attempts to control information. For the first time in living memory, someone was not only standing up to the Zephyrian Empire, but actually inflicting significant casualties on their supposedly invincible fleet. The news reached every corner of Confederation space, carried by traitors, smugglers, and sympathetic communications officers who defied orders to remain silent. On the industrial world of Rigel Prime, engineer Alex Turner received an encrypted message from his Rigelian friend Zarak, who had worked closely with human trade missions for 3 years. The message contained detailed tactical data about Empire fleet movements, shield frequencies, and weapon specifications. Zarak's note was brief but clear. He could not officially help humanity, but he refused to stand by while his friends were slaughtered by an empire he had always secretly despised. Similar acts of covert assistance began occurring throughout Confederation space. A supply depot manager on Centauri Station reported medical supplies stolen, but the supplies mysteriously appeared at a human refugee camp 2 days later. Navigation charts showing safe hyperspace routes away from Empire. Patrol areas were leaked to human colony ships fleeing deeper into unexplored territory. Individual acts of courage and conscience multiplied as ordinary beings chose to help despite their government's official policies. The Empire responded to their mounting losses with escalating brutality. Emperor Zephyros himself broke a century of tradition by personally ordering the deployment of the Annihilator fleet, massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets apart with focused gravity weapons. War Commander Kithara requested permission to use biological weapons that would render human worlds uninhabitable for generations. The Emperor's patience with humanity's stubborn resistance was completely exhausted. Meanwhile, human forces continued to adapt and evolve their tactics with each engagement. Admiral Rodriguez established a mobile command center aboard the carrier Constitution, constantly moving through human space to coordinate resistance efforts while avoiding Empire hunter squadrons. Jake Morrison's task force specialized in hit-and-run attacks on Empire supply convoys, using guerrilla tactics that the rigid Empire military doctrine was poorly equipped to counter. Dr. Amy Johnson achieved a major breakthrough in her laboratory, creating stable quantum disruptors that could be mass-produced using standard human industrial equipment. The new weapons were immediately distributed to human ships throughout the galaxy, giving even small patrol boats the ability to threaten Empire cruisers. The psychological impact on Empire crews was enormous as their technological superiority began to evaporate. Captain Steve Parker, commanding a new ship after Liberty's destruction, led the first major attack using the upgraded quantum disruptors. His squadron of 12 fighters engaged an Empire patrol force of 40 ships and achieved complete victory without losing a single vessel. The entire Empire formation was destroyed in less than an hour, marking the first time humans had won. A fleet engagement against numerically superior forces. The victory at Kepler Nebula sent shockwaves through both human and Empire command structures. Admiral Rodriguez finally had proof that human forces could not only survive against the Empire, but actually win battles when properly equipped and commanded. War Commander Kithara faced the humiliating prospect of reporting to Emperor Zephyros that an entire patrol squadron had been annihilated by the primitives she had promised to exterminate within days. Individual Confederation species began quietly reconsidering their positions as evidence mounted that the Empire might actually be vulnerable. The Altarians, known for their pacifist philosophy, started providing humanitarian aid to human refugees while maintaining official neutrality. Young Rigelian officers began resigning their commissions rather than participate in what they saw as a betrayal of everything their civilization claimed to represent. On Earth, President Hayes coordinated with military leaders to plan humanity's next moves. The initial desperate defense had evolved into something approaching an actual military campaign. Human forces were no longer simply trying to delay the inevitable, they were fighting to win. The quantum disruptor technology had leveled the playing field enough to make victory theoretically possible, though the odds remained heavily stacked against them. The Empire's rigid military hierarchy began showing signs of strain under the pressure of unexpected resistance. Field commanders who had never faced serious opposition found themselves struggling against human tactics they had never encountered. Empire crews, accustomed to easy victories against terrified enemies, discovered that humans fought back with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Commander Kelly Wright established the first human training academy for quantum disruptor tactics, teaching pilots and gunners how to maximize the effectiveness of their new weapons. Her combat experience against Empire forces made her invaluable as an instructor, and her academy began producing crews capable of consistently defeating Empire ships in single combat. Human forces were becoming genuinely dangerous opponents, rather than merely stubborn victims. The turning point came when Admiral Rodriguez scored a major victory at the Vega system, where his tactical brilliance and superior weapons allowed a human fleet to defeat an Empire force twice its size. The battle demonstrated that human forces had evolved from desperate defenders into capable attackers. War Commander Kithara's reports to Emperor Zephyros became increasingly frantic as she struggled to explain how a species with 5 years of spaceflight experience was outfighting an empire with thousands of years of military tradition. Intelligence. Reports indicated that the Empire was pulling additional forces from other sectors to deal with the human crisis. Species that had been under Empire occupation for generations began experiencing reduced garrison forces as ships were diverted to the human front. Some of these species started testing the Empire's weakened grip on their worlds with small acts of defiance and sabotage. Jake Morrison's raiders had become a legend throughout human space as they struck deep into Empire territory, destroying supply depots and communications relays that the Empire had never bothered to defend. His pilots wore black armbands in memory of fallen comrades, and Empire crews began to fear encounters with the Ghost Squadron that appeared without warning and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The psychological impact of sustained resistance was spreading beyond the immediate war zone. Confederation officials who had voted to abandon humanity found themselves facing increasingly hostile populations who questioned their leaders' courage and moral authority. The idea that someone could successfully fight the Empire was reshaping galactic politics in ways no one had anticipated. Dr. Johnson's laboratories were now producing quantum disruptors powerful enough to threaten Empire dreadnoughts, and her research teams were working on even more advanced weapons. The technological gap that had made the Empire invincible was closing rapidly as human innovation accelerated under the pressure of total war. What had begun as a desperate last stand was becoming something the Empire had never faced before, a genuine threat to their galactic dominance. Emperor Zephyros had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries through fear and overwhelming military might. No species had ever successfully resisted the Empire for more than a few days, and none had ever inflicted significant casualties on his fleets. The human resistance had now stretched into weeks, with Empire losses mounting daily. His patience was completely exhausted, and his reputation for invincibility was cracking under the pressure of this unprecedented challenge. The Emperor's response was swift and absolute. He ordered the complete annihilation of Earth and every human colony using planet-killer weapons and forbidden biological warfare. The massive Annihilator fleet, led by the Emperor's personal flagship Eternal Dominion, began its final approach to Sol system. This fleet included ships that had never been defeated in battle, and weapons that could destroy entire star systems. Humanity would be erased from existence as a warning to any other species that might consider defying the Empire. Admiral Susan Clark received intelligence reports about the approaching Annihilator fleet and immediately began pulling back all available human forces for the ultimate battle at Earth. Every ship, from massive carriers to single-pilot fighters, received orders to converge on humanity's homeworld. Colony defense forces abandoned their positions, exploration vessels turned back from the frontier, and merchant ships were hastily converted into warships. President Robert Hayes addressed the planet one final time as the Empire's ultimate fleet approached. His broadcast reached every human settlement in the galaxy, from the underground cities of Mars to the farming colonies on distant worlds. His message was simple and direct. Humanity would make its final stand at Earth, and they would either win their freedom or die as free beings rather than live as slaves. The gathering human fleet was impressive by their own standards but pathetic compared to the approaching Empire armada. Admiral Clark commanded fewer than 300 ships of all types against over 5,000 Empire vessels, including planet killers that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. The quantum disruptors had given human forces a fighting chance against regular Empire ships, but the Annihilator fleet included vessels with armor and shields beyond anything they had previously encountered. Jake Morrison arrived at Earth aboard. His rebuilt ship, now equipped with the most advanced quantum disruptors Dr. Johnson had been able to create. His squadron had been reduced to just 6 vessels, but these survivors were the most experienced Empire killers in the human fleet. They would lead the fighter attack when the final battle began, knowing it would almost certainly be their last. Mission. Dr. Amy Johnson revealed her ultimate weapon as the Empire fleet entered Sol system. Working in secret, she had constructed a massive quantum disruptor capable of destroying even the Emperor's flagship. The weapon was unstable and could only be fired once before the entire system overloaded, but it represented humanity's one chance to strike a decisive blow against their enemies. The catch was that delivering the weapon required a suicide run directly into the heart of the Empire formation. The Empire fleet deployed in perfect formation as they approached Earth, their ships moving with the precision of a military force that had never known defeat. Emperor Zephyros commanded from the bridge of Eternal Dominion, personally overseeing the destruction of the species that had dared to challenge his authority. War Commander Kithara positioned her ships to ensure that no human vessel could escape. The coming slaughter. The battle began with the Empire's devastating assault on Earth's orbital defenses. Space stations that had taken decades to build vanished in seconds under the concentrated fire of the Annihilator fleet. Human defensive platforms fought back desperately, their quantum disruptors managing to damage several Empire ships before being overwhelmed. The skies above Earth lit up with explosions as humanity's last defenses crumbled under the Empire's assault. Admiral Rodriguez directed the human fleet in a series of brilliant tactical maneuvers, using Earth's gravity well, and orbital debris to mask their movements. The human ships fought with unprecedented coordination and determination, each crew knowing that failure meant the extinction of their entire species. Squadron after squadron made suicide runs against Empire dreadnoughts, trading their lives for damage that accumulated slowly but steadily. Then something unprecedented happened. The first alien ships arrived to join the human fleet. A squadron of Rigelian fighters, followed by Altarian support vessels, and then more ships from species throughout the galaxy. Individual captains and crews, defying their governments and risking everything, came to stand with humanity in their darkest hour. The reinforcements were small in number, but enormous in symbolic importance. Captain Kelly Wright led her fighters in a desperate attack on the Empire's planet-killer weapons, trying to prevent them from firing on Earth's surface. Her pilots flew directly into the teeth of the Empire's defensive fire, their ships exploding around them as they pressed their attack home. One planet killer was crippled, then another, buying precious time for the evacuation of Earth's major cities. The alien ships that had joined the battle fought with the same desperate courage as their human allies. Rigelian pilots who had never fired a weapon in anger threw themselves at Empire cruisers. Altarian crews, whose species had been pacifists for millennia, manned torpedo launchers and quantum disruptors with grim determination. The galaxy was witnessing something it had never seen before. Multiple species standing together against the Empire's tyranny. Jake Morrison volunteered for the suicide mission to deliver Dr. Johnson's ultimate weapon. His ship was modified to carry the massive quantum disruptor, but the weight and instability of the weapon made maneuvering almost impossible. He would have to fly directly through the Empire fleet's defensive screen and ram the Emperor's flagship, knowing that he would never survive the mission. As Jake's ship began its final run toward eternal dominion, the combined human and alien fleet launched their most desperate attack. Every remaining ship threw itself at the Empire formation, trying to clear a path for the suicide mission. The space around Earth became a swirling maelstrom of explosions and weapons fire as two civilizations fought for the future of the galaxy. The Emperor watched Jake's approach with growing alarm as human and alien ships died around the lone fighter struggling toward his flagship. War Commander Cathara ordered every available weapon to target the suicide ship, but the supporting attack was so fierce that her gunners could not get a clear shot. For the first time in his long life, Emperor Zephyros felt the cold touch of fear as he realized what the humans were attempting. Jake Morrison's ship, battered and barely functioning, reached the Eternal Dominion's hull and detonated Dr. Johnson's ultimate weapon. The explosion lit up space for light years in every direction, as the Emperor's flagship disintegrated along with the supposedly immortal ruler who had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. The shockwave rippled through the Empire fleet, carrying with it the news that their god-emperor was dead. The death of Emperor Zephyros sent shockwaves through the Empire fleet that went far beyond the physical destruction of their flagship. For 3 centuries, the Emperor had been considered immortal and invincible, a godlike figure whose word was absolute law across thousands of star systems. His sudden death shattered the Empire's mystique of invincibility and threw their entire command structure into chaos. War Commander Kithara watched in horror as Jake Morrison's sacrifice vaporized the Eternal Dominion, along with everything she had believed about the Empire's destiny. Around her, Empire ship commanders hesitated and questioned orders for the first time in their careers. The rigid hierarchy that had made the Empire so effective began to collapse as officers struggled to comprehend a universe where their god-emperor could be killed by primitive humans. The news of the Emperor's death spread across the galaxy at light speed, carried by automated communication relays that the Empire had never bothered to secure. On occupied worlds throughout Empire space, subject species who had lived in terror for generations suddenly looked up at the sky with new hope. If humans could kill the Emperor himself, then perhaps the Empire was not as invincible as everyone had believed. Rebellion erupted simultaneously on dozens of worlds as species that had been crushed under the Empire's boot for centuries suddenly found the courage to fight back. The Andromedans rose up on their industrial worlds, destroying Empire factories and military installations. The crystalline beings of Sigma Draconis shattered their chains and began coordinating attacks on Empire supply lines. Even the peaceful Tau Cetians took up arms against their oppressors for the first time in their recorded history. The surviving Empire forces, now leaderless and facing rebellion throughout their territory, attempted to complete their mission by destroying Earth with their remaining planet-killer weapons. War Commander Kithara, desperate to salvage something from the disaster, ordered the immediate bombardment of humanity's homeworld. If she could still eliminate the species that had started this galactic uprising, she might be able to restore the Empire's reputation for invincible power. The growing fleet of alien rebels, inspired by humanity's example and Jake Morrison's sacrifice, intercepted the Empire's planet killers before they could fire on Earth. Ships from dozens of species that had never cooperated before worked together with perfect coordination, their crews united by a common hatred of imperial tyranny. The massive weapons were destroyed one by one as the combined rebel fleet overwhelmed their escorts. Commander Kelly Wright, now the senior surviving human officer in the battle, coordinated the final assault on the Empire's remaining forces. Her fighters, reinforced by alien volunteers from across the galaxy, swarmed over the Empire ships like angry hornets. The quantum disruptor technology was shared freely among all rebel forces, ensuring that every ship could threaten even the largest Empire vessels. The Empire fleet began to break apart as individual ships surrendered or fled rather than face certain destruction. War Commander Kithara found herself commanding a force that was disintegrating around her as captains chose survival over loyalty to a dead emperor. Some Empire ships joined the rebellion outright, their crews finally free to act on long-suppressed hatred of the system they had served. The battle ended not with a climactic final engagement, but with the gradual collapse of Empire resistance as their forces scattered across the galaxy. Those Empire ships that escaped carried news of their defeat to the far corners of their territory, spreading word that the 3-century reign of terror was finally over. The galaxy's most powerful military force had been broken by a coalition, led by humanity, the youngest spacefaring species. Admiral Susan Clark found herself commanding not just the human fleet, but a growing alliance of species united by their shared victory over tyranny. The Galactic Confederation had dissolved in disgrace when member species refused to follow leaders who had abandoned their allies. In its place, a new alliance was forming based on principles of mutual defense and respect for individual species' rights. President Hayes, addressing the planet from the ruins of Washington, D.C., announced the formation of the Galactic Liberation Alliance, with humanity playing a leading role despite being one of the youngest civilizations in space. The quantum disruptor technology would be shared freely with all Alliance members, ensuring that no single empire could again dominate the galaxy through superior firepower alone. Dr. Amy Johnson's laboratories became the heart of a new technological renaissance as human innovation combined with alien knowledge to create advances that neither could have achieved alone. The weapons that had won the war were quickly converted to peaceful purposes, with quantum technology revolutionizing everything from interstellar travel to planetary construction projects. Captain Kelly Wright, promoted to Admiral, established the Morrison Defense Academy on the rebuilt Luna base, training officers from dozens of species in the tactics that had defeated the Empire. The Academy's motto became, "Stand together or fall alone," memorializing the lesson humanity had taught the galaxy about the power of united resistance against tyranny. The former Empire worlds transitioned to self-governance with surprising speed, as species that had been oppressed for generations eagerly embraced their newfound freedom. Some worlds chose to join the new alliance, while others preferred independence. But all were united in their determination never again to bow to imperial tyranny. The galaxy was reshaping itself around principles of cooperation rather than domination. On Earth, construction began on a memorial listing the names of every human who had died in the war against the Empire. Jake Morrison's name was carved first, followed by the crews of every ship that had made the ultimate sacrifice. The memorial's inscription read simply, "They stood alone so that none would ever have to stand alone again." President Hayes delivered the dedication speech for the memorial, emphasizing that humanity's greatest victory had not been defeating the Empire, but proving that courage and principle could inspire others to stand up against tyranny, regardless of the odds. The war had begun with humanity standing alone against impossible opposition, but it had ended with half the galaxy united in the cause of freedom. The final scene showed former enemies working together to rebuild what the Empire had destroyed. Human engineers worked alongside Rigelian technicians and Altarian scientists, creating new worlds where cooperation replaced competition and diversity was celebrated rather than suppressed. Children of a dozen different species played together in schools that taught the history of the Great Rebellion and the importance of standing up for what was right. War Commander Kithara, now a prisoner awaiting trial for war crimes, watched from her cell as the galaxy transformed around her. The empire she had served so faithfully was gone forever, replaced by something she could never have imagined, a galactic community where strength came from unity rather than fear. The humans had not just won their war for survival, they had won the peace that followed and created a better galaxy for everyone. The day humanity stood alone against the Empire had become the day the galaxy learned to stand together.